We tend to think of science as this pure, unstoppable force for good, a constant march toward progress. But what happens when that march goes off the rails? Today, we're diving into some of the most unsettling experiments in history, the ones that crossed a serious ethical line and completely rewrote the rulebook for research.
So, yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? How far is too far? It's something we are still figuring out. But the ethical rules that we kind of take for granted today, the ones that protect people in studies, they didn't just appear out of thin air. No, they were born from a pretty dark and disturbing past.
And a big part of that disturbing past kicks off with a simple, kind of terrifying question. What are people really capable of when they're just, following orders? So let's start there. Let's explore how the power of authority can twist human behavior in some pretty scary ways.
Okay, so imagine you sign up for a research study. You think you're doing your part for science, but what you don't know is that you're the real subject. And they're testing your own capacity for cruelty. In the 60s and 70s, two legendary experiments did just that, and honestly, the results were just shocking. So these two studies basically uncovered the same dark truth, but from different angles. In the Stanford prison experiment, you had regular college students assigned to be guards, and they became cruel and abusive almost overnight. It showed how easily we can fall into a role we're given. But the Milgram experiment? Wow. It found that a whopping 2/3 of people would give what they believed were lethal electric shocks to a total stranger, all because a guy in a lab coat told them to. It proved that it's terrifyingly easy for us to just pass the buck and say, hey, I was just doing what I was told.
Okay, so those experiments were about what people could be convinced to do in a lab setting. But in other cases, the harm was way more direct, completely systematic, and it went on for decades, targeting some of the most vulnerable people in society.
This one is, it's one of the most infamous and shameful episodes in all of medical history. The Tuskegee Syphilis Study. For 40 years, 40, researchers just watched hundreds of African-American men suffer and die from a disease that was completely treatable. They were told they were getting free health care, but they were being lied to. A cure, penicillin, was available for decades, and it was deliberately denied to them, all for the sake of observation. It's just horrific.
And Tuskegee was not a one-off thing. The common thread here is the exploitation of people who couldn't fight back. You had the Monster Study, where they took orphan children and deliberately tried to give them a stutter with negative feedback, which scarred many of them for life. Then there was the Aversion Project, where soldiers were put through these brutal programs to try and change their sexual orientation. And in other trials, soldiers were essentially used as human guinea pigs for dangerous drugs. These weren't just mistakes, they were profound abuses of power.
So we've seen obedience, we've seen direct physical harm, but what about messing with the mind itself? What happens when an experiment isn't just about what you'll do, but about tampering with the very essence of how you feel? The next couple of studies tried to engineer two of our most basic emotions, fear and love.
So in the Little Albert experiment, a researcher literally conditioned a baby to be terrified of a harmless, fluffy white rat by banging a steel bar behind his head every time he saw it. And sure, it proved fear could be learned, but they created a phobia in a child and then never even tried to undo it. On the other side of the coin, Harry Harlow's work with baby monkeys is just heartbreaking. He proved how vital comfort and affection are by taking infant monkeys from their mothers and giving them wire surrogates instead. The babies always chose a cloth-covered surrogate over a wire one with food, proving they needed comfort more than anything. But the experiment left them severely and permanently traumatized.
Okay, so after decades of these kinds of horrifying studies, the scientific community and the public just couldn't ignore it anymore. The sheer weight of all these ethical disasters finally forced a massive change, a real reckoning that would completely redefine the relationship between a researcher and the people they study.
And this is the real turning point in the story. All of this suffering, this deception, this cruelty, it wasn't entirely for nothing. It led directly to the creation of a system, a framework, designed specifically to make sure this kind of stuff could never, ever happen again.
And here it is, the Institutional Review Board, or IRB. You can basically think of it as the ethics police for science. Today, you can't just go out and run an experiment on people. No way. Your research has to be reviewed and approved by an IRB first. They are the gatekeepers, the guardians, put in place specifically to prevent the exact kinds of abuses we've been talking about.
And these IRBs all operate on a few core non-negotiable principles. First, informed consent. You have to know exactly what you're signing up for, the complete opposite of what happened to the men in Tuskegee. Second, do no harm. The participants' well-being is the #1 priority, a rule clearly broken in the Monster Study.
You've also got confidentiality, so your data is kept safe. And this one is huge, the right to withdraw. You can quit a study at any time, for any reason, no questions asked, a right the prisoners in the Stanford experiment definitely didn't have. So all of that brings us to right now. The ethical battles of the past created the rules we live by today. But the story's not over. New frontiers like AI, genetic engineering, and how we use data are creating brand new ethical minefields. So that original question is still very much alive. How far is too far? And maybe the bigger question is, who gets to decide? It's definitely something to think about. Thanks for watching.